it would be to look at the problem of how to spatialize, how to make it a spatial that, in other words, kind of like puts it into our spatial world, even if it, in other words, it doesn't necessarily mean it material. And so there's certain kind of like moments where theoretical discourse seems to me to get very spatial, and one of them is this Stendhal Syndrome. I mean, I think, personally, I think that most psychoanalytic theory, at least any psychoanalytic theory that comes from Freud, is kind of like implicitly spatial, like it uses so many spatial concepts, it'd be almost unintelligible without it. But having said that, it seems to me that things like the Stendhal Syndrome are one of those points where space and theory intersect. I did want, I won't say it now, but I'll tell you now what if there's time, I would like to talk about. I'm interested in the degree to which Kant's theory of the sublime intersects with Stendhal's. It seems to me that actually they might be kind of like talking about the same thing. This capacity to be overwhelmed by a work of art. But that's one thing. The other thing is I wanted to talk about the Parthenon, because it's extraordinary. I have this really cheesy book here. It's like the Reader's Digest series of kind of like great cultural moments, and they have one on the Parthenon, okay? But there's a section in the back of it which is called something like the Parthenon in Literature, and they have quotes from different people and about kind of like, coming upon the Parthenon. There's a passage by Isadora Duncan, the dancer, in here, which is quite extraordinary, being overwhelmed, being challenged and overwhelmed by the part. What's interesting to me about that is that it's almost the same terms that Le Corbusier, the French modernist architect, used to describe his experience with the plant, which isn't in it. But and I think that he takes, he doesn't talk about Stendhal syndrome, but his trajectory suggests not so much the removal of fourth wall, but a kind of failure of space to kind of distance from your eye. Anyway, I've sort of spilled all my beans. I realize baton maybe.
Thanks, Lawrence. I think that resonates with almost everything we're going to be saying. And since we have a big Greek presence here, bringing up the Parthenon is not a bad idea. Sarah? Oh, sorry, we don't hear you. There's something wrong with your sound. Yeah, very good.
Yeah, right. So, my interest is because I found the Stendhal syndrome hard to believe in. I completed a PhD last year in comparative literature. So I was looking at psychoanalysis and the body and theater. And I had three authors, one of whom is Beckett. And Beckett, has been a profound influence on me. And I can really see that literature and art. Well, I suppose the question I had was, what impact can art have? And if it has impact, how can we theorize that change without being inaccurate about it? So I found myself kind of working with the idea of what can art do. And I've heard about the Stendhal syndrome, but I just found it hard to believe in. So I'm here to sort of, find out about it, I suppose. Yeah, there's just something about it that just hearing it in passing, my response was disbelief. So I'm interested to uncover that. And while you were explaining at the beginning the mechanism of it, anxiety and fright, and so I would question, what is that fright about? If that is what is being overwhelming about a work of art. And another question I have is just the relationship of literature and psychoanalysis, and how we can. So I'm here to be converted, I suppose. Thanks,
Sarah. It's one of the commonest literary devices. If you want to deliver exposition to your reader or audience, you introduce a skeptic, and the rest of the characters in the novel or play spend their time trying to convince the skeptic of something, and of course the reader buys into it. So it's absolutely essential to have an in-house skeptic.
Okay. Yeah, that's
thank you.
I'll take that position. Great.
Yeah, usually the skeptic gets a hard time. I mean, once they state their skeptical position, the whole team piles on them. And, how dare you? But I suppose I suppose anyone will be invited. Thanks to Sarah, we're now invited to share our personal experiences and help pull her over the line.
I must add, though, that I'm an enthusiastic skeptic, because, as I say, I've been impacted by, in particular, the work of Beckett. But I wouldn't say it was the Stendhal syndrome, unless it was, and I'm in disavowal of it. So.
A rose by any other name.
Yeah.
Yes, you're in denial.
Okay.
Good
enough.
I think when we near the end of the Zoom, we'll light a campfire and share our stories of personal experiences with Stendhal. Mark, we'll be watching your movie in a little bit. Could you tell us something about how you got into the Stendhal?
Yeah, well, I'm an artist, and I'm currently sort of midway through a PhD, which is a practice-based one. So it means that I'm exploring ideas around the concept of metalepsis through my work, through ideas of moving between different levels of register in a work of art, perhaps, like how you'll see in the film that we're going to watch, how when an image moves through different registers, we have to reorientate ourselves to that image and to work out a new subject position. And in this moment of change, there's a kind of that there's potential for the uncanny or for kind of some element of terror, I suppose, slightly, ever so slightly, modestly. But so I've been following Don's work for quite a long time, since about 2001 or 2, I think, and I was intrigued with it, and I suppose it's just it's grown on me, and glad to be here.
Thank you, Mark. I'm your fungus.
Yeah.
I circulate things beneath ground. You'll never know what I'm taking away or giving. Cynthia Penna, per favore.
Yes. I am an Italian curator, art curator, and I am very intrigued because it happened not exactly to me, but to a friend, to an American friend, a gallerist who came to Naples in Italy, and he spent one day with a friend of ours to go around in the old town of Naples. And Naples is a very complicated city, but very, very rich in art and history. And at the end of the day, he started to, when he went back to the hotel, he started to have a temperature, and he spent the entire night without sleeping and with the temperature and without understanding what was happening. And the day after, he was fine, and everything disappeared. So at the end, we talked to each other, and we decided, we arrived to the point that it was a real syndrome of Stendhal syndrome, because he was completely overwhelmed by the art of Naples. And Naples is made of levels, starting from the Greeks and passing through Romans and all the domination from all over the Europe. And we are so surrounded by art in Italy that it doesn't happen doesn't happen too much to us. But last year, I can give you my personal experience during the semi-half lockdown due to COVID. I was able to go to Pompeii, archaeological site, and I was completely alone with my husband in Pompeii. And it was the biggest and the most beautiful experience of my life, because imagine the archaeological site of Pompeii completely empty. no people inside. We were the only two guests because we were able to to walk and to enter because Pompeii was still opened, and then after 1 week they closed it and nobody could visit it for 1 year due to COVID. But during a semi lockdown, we were able to enter. Imagine the sensation of being and walking into the streets of Pompeii completely alone and with the archaeological. It was the most touching experience. So I am here not to, because I am very curious about what you are going to say about the Stendhal syndrome, even though maybe we are, it never happened. To me, it happened only in a positive way. I didn't feel bad or sick or ill in a way, but I absorbed art in a very positive. So I am very curious to listen about the other.
Thank you. I think most of our personal experiences would be positive versions of the Stendhal. You don't have to go to the hospital to know that you can be overwhelmed by the work of art. I found myself in the Campanile at the church on Isola San Giorgio in Venice. They didn't want us to go in because they didn't tell us this. They were going to ring the bells in about 10 minutes. And so they let us in and we went up and we happened to be standing next to about 5 or 6 very large bells when the Campanile began to ring for Vespers. And we heard things that we were pretty sure no mortal has ever heard. When you're standing next to a bell, you can count literally about 27 different tones out of any one, and we were all just near collapse. I don't know how we made it down in the elevator, but anyway, things like that are not negative, but they certainly are physiological and revelatory. So thank you very much, Dominique.
Don, I have a couple insertions since we're co-moderating this. Okay. Cynthia and Renato are renowned art collectors. And part of my curiosity would be, is there a component of Stendhal syndrome when you assess a work for collecting? The other comment was, I think people have a knee-jerk reaction perhaps to Stendhal syndrome. So maybe we can insert another name like frisson, which is another manifestation, right? Physical manifestation of a feeling. So those are just my 2 comments. So from a collector's standpoint, if there's a frisson that occurs with collecting art, whether you're going to purchase it or not. And the other is avoiding that knee-jerk reaction to Stendhal, which seems to be quite limiting at this point. Thanks. Maybe not now, but after the introductions, we can do that.
Okay.
I love it. Frisson. Okay, Dominic, tell us about your frissons.
I think
hello.
We're having a little trouble with
that. Hello.
I think Cynthia is trying to answer, but her connection is not.
Okay.
Right. Okay. Shall we wait for Cynthia, or should I sort of modestly introduce myself?
No, I think go ahead and introduce yourself, Dominic. We'll get to the other comments later when we have our personal stories. Yeah.
So, because I see in my bracket, I see this is like a second studio instead of my name because it's a university computer. So my name is Dominic Lehmann. And I'm a painter, and it happened to me that I'm a professor at the University of Arts in Poznań, running painting course, which actually brought us together with Don and Cohen. I've known Cohen much earlier, but he last year, because of this pandemic sort of bracketing situation of all of us meeting in Zooms and other means of communication, I had the chance. I've organized in the studio called the Sealed Studio Talks. And the surprise was that Cohen invited Don to accompany him with a fantastic lecture, which actually started from the syndrome, from the Stendhal syndrome. So for me, it's like a novelty for the moment to actually join this wonderful group, which I'm very proud. I was very proud to host our first meeting. And what I can say about my work is that from my particular perspective, what really interests me the most is the actual question of a proximity in terms of the work of art, because most of my work, you can tell, they are ghost paintings. They use the different means of expression, starting from the painting surface, which creates the haptic field for the actual ghost, which is usually performative recording appearing as a projection on this field. So my biggest question mark in this conversation is actually the difference in terms of the different means of expressions that affect that type of a syndrome, because we were discussing that in details, but I think we should really also focus on the terms of the actual way how the viewer or the protagonist of the spectacle, who is the viewer, approaches the work of art, meaning that with the Stendhal Syndrome, we have the recorded cases of encountering with the work of art, but not necessarily in a cinematic immersive field. That's really interesting, that you can rarely find a Stendhal Syndrome in the cinemas or in a comforting dark box that we somehow submerged in. We basically experience that being totally aware of our own presence in front of the work of art, which changes the actual perspective of encounter. And that's what I'm really interested, because that's what I do. I work with my projectable sort of hybrid paintings in the lit space, which actually emphasize the presence of the viewer. So I think that's really what really interests me the most. Apart from that, at the moment I'm working on the project which is going to be a Madnicity pavilion for the next Venice Biennale. The Madnicity is a mad pavilion, transnational, because madness, this is what unites us, in fact, despite the race, origin, age, or other details describing ourselves. So the Madness Pavilion is going to, I hope, is going to be established for the next Venice Biennale in San Servolo in Venice, which used to be a former psychiatrist hospital, and I'm going to be the first representative of this pavilion. So I'm proud of it, and because of that also I'm still very much interested in this discussion, which started almost a half a year in our modest student gathering in my second painting studio at the University of Arts. And so more or less that's about me for the moment and my focus. Thank you.
Well, I know Kwan will back me up on this, but if you go take a look at Dominique's work, if you can find it on the web quite easily. His projections on architecture are utterly fantastic and spooky and uncanny. I think if you imagined it was possible for architecture itself to collapse and have a Stendhal Syndrome, Dominique can make it happen.
I'm flattered.
Yeah, and you should be allowed on the site all the sites like the one Cynthia went to, which reminded me that Freud also talks about Jensen's novel Gradiva. And it's a story about a German guy who goes and finds himself alone in Pompeii. At least he thinks he's alone, and he sees a woman that he concludes must be the reincarnated spirit of Gradiva. The ancient, it's a kind of tradition of walking in procession. But Freud is a classic skeptic, just like Sarah. You know, he doesn't have a romantic bone in his body, but he understands that other people do.
Yeah, just as a side note, I would recommend, Dominic, your Breathing Cathedral or the Breathing Church is a remarkable work.
Dominique, where would be the best place to find that?
I'm not the I'm not the best case of providing info. I think for the moment, if you, I'll be very grateful if you would just remember my name. So then you may, if you would have some curiosity, you find ways, definitely.
So Dominic, can you change the label?
Recently, I also work with the different artists, because this period we're getting through allows us, I think, to think about the cooperation, what it may mean, how we can restructure the idea of the artist cooperation. So my recent work is based also on the projection performances, but this time the performances are choreographed by this fantastic dancer from Berlin, working with Sasha Waltz, called Maria Colucci. And my next exhibition will be basically dealing with that matter. So you can find that on the website, which is called laymancolucci.com. So I think this could be something which could lead you to some basics in terms of my practice.
Thanks. Yeah, please do that. In architecture, we've only had John Haydock, who tried to integrate performance and dance with works of architecture that could actually be built and moved around inside. So we'll love to take a look at that. Andrew Payne, one of the founding members of IPSA.
Hi. Yeah, I mean, I was drawn into this, I suppose, largely by Dawn and a combination of Dawn and naive curiosity. I'd certainly heard the phrase before, but really hadn't given the syndrome much thought before hearing Dawn talk about it and then receiving his invitation to attend the first meeting. Having said that, it does resonate with a number of longstanding interests of my own. The one that comes most immediately to mind is one that resonates, I think, with Evangelos' description of his own interests. I'm paraphrasing you here, Evangelos, but the charismatic features of persons and objects. So I'm very interested in that phenomenon, in the phenomenon of charisma. First of all, I suppose, as it relates to my interest in the apotropaic and apotropaic theories of the origins of artistic practice, and more specifically ornamental practice. I'm currently working on a book on ornament, and a good bit of the early part of that book is spent discussing the role of magical talismans and their associated iconographies in animistic practice. So I'm interested, I suppose, first of all, in ornament, or rather in ornament, in the Stendhal Syndrome as a kind of reversal or collapse of the originally apotropaic or protective vocation of the work of art. So that's one point, I think, where my own research interests intersect the syndrome. Another relates to my broader interest, ecstatic experience, and ecstatic experience insofar as it arises at the nexus of religion and art. But with respect to ecstatic experience, I'm particularly interested in the experience of self-estrangement that accompanies experiences of suggestion or auto-suggestion, including love, and including, of course, the psychoanalytic transfer. So the way in which the problematic of a kind of suggestive possession of oneself by another, to the extent that that problem or that interest intersects the syndrome we're here to discuss. That's, another point of, I would say, of contact. But I'm also, Lorenz, I don't want to steal your fire, but you sent a little video in preparation for this discussion, at least to Dawn and I, in which and I can't remember the artist or architect's name, but it was really about, you were asking questions, and I hope I'm not paraphrasing you, but you were asking questions about, let's say, apparatus of display and their paragonal apparatus, let's say, using the Kantian language, and their role in the production of what's sometimes called, in discussions, the Stendhal Syndrome, the fourth wall. So that's another kind of oblique point into this topic, that the whole issue of the relationship between the art object and its apparatus of display, to say broadly, the relationship between the work and its frame has, of course, been at the center of discussions of painting since Scheil and the early 20th century, right through to the familiar debates coming out of Fried. So that whole discussion to have a potential to enrich immeasurably our understanding of it. So that's the kind of concept.
Wow, we're forming up quickly. I'm going to let Marcia go first, or next, sorry. She may have to leave a little bit early, so I wanted to introduce her to everyone, or let her introduce herself. Marcia Furstein.
Yeah, I'm a newbie here. Don invited me, and I thought, oh, this looks interesting. He'd actually mentioned or talked a little bit about the Stendhal Syndrome in a symposium that I was in with him. Was it a week or two ago? I can't even remember anymore. So I thought this would be an interesting, really interesting, and it is related to my work. I've written a lot about affective environments and art and the relationship it has to affect you as you live with it, and specifically work related to Claude Bragdon and his theatrical performances and spaces. And settings or set designs, actually, as well as Oscar Schlemmer, who I've studied for many years, and specifically I've looked at a few houses and the kind of work that he's done throughout a series of houses and the relationship of those insertions or the wall paintings as they affected the people who live there, the dwellers. So this really fits into what I've been doing for a very long time. So I thought I'd listen in, but unfortunately I have to leave early. So I thought I'd get a dose of it. Thanks, Don.
Thanks, Marcia. Okay, let's see who's next. Ted Zelmo.
Yes, so I'm Ted Zelmo, and I'm an archivist in Atlanta, and I've been corresponding with Don as pen pals for like a year and a half when I was I graduated from college last June, and that semester beforehand I was just really getting interested in Lacan, and Don sort of opened that whole world up to me and showed me that it's not just like a decoder, or psychoanalysis is not just this decoder ring, what's going on behind the scenes, but how the behind the scenes are structurally sort of situated and disturbed. And I think Stendhal has a whole lot to do with the limit of the scene. I understand the gist of it being, you look at the work of art or whatever, or you're in the presence of it and you're overcome viscerally by this enormous, sublime, terrifying experience. But where is this encounter taking place? And why? And what does it have to do with the particular artifact and being there, rather than overcome by the beauty of something you see in like a reproduction in a book? That wouldn't work, I don't think. But yeah, where is the Stendhal Syndrome is sort of the question I'm holding on to as I'm listening to what y'all are saying. Yeah, so it's an honor to be here, and yeah, thank you.
Great. You could team up with Sarah as being our in-house skeptics. We need to keep asking the question, like, what the hell is this? Why does it happen? What really goes on? Does it have other forms? So we need to keep hammering away at what we really think it might be, and what kind of form theory would have to take to address it completely. Okay, Bennett Lieberman, be glad to hear from you now.
Okay, hi. I was invited by KJ. We've been friends for a long time, and a lot of his modes of entering into our artistic conversations have been interesting to me. It's sort of an ongoing conversation we've had. And when he mentioned that, I guess Don, you and he were, and I guess Andrew were beginning this, I guess as far as I know, the first in August, I was certainly wanted to participate then, but was traveling and did not have access to, or actually the window of time to do it at that point. I'm traveling again, so I'll actually have to leave probably in about half an hour. But it's great to just hear the beginnings of this conversation. And my specific relationship with Stendhal Syndrome, I have to say, is not, I would say, as defined or specific as I think a lot of the participants are describing. It just corresponds to epiphanic moments or transcendent moments or border breaking moments or consciousness shaking moments. And I'll be curious to learn more about this, what's being specified really, rather than just an overwhelming encounter with art, which is almost a defining experience of great art, and how this is, where this goes in relation to that. And so I it just resonates at sort of a benchmark quote for me is the thing I put up on the chat, the Rilke quote, "Beauty is nothing but the beginning of a terror, we can unable to endure." And that would be the kind of moment of collapse. If you get another step further, closer to that terror, then, Stendhal could happen to syncope that KJ mentioned or was mentioned in the flyer introducing us to this event. So that, it's just art as a kind of, and I guess it's again related to the ecstatic moment that Andrew was discussing, these kind of transformative or consciousness shaking moments. So that's I think been a goal of my artwork. And before that, I was actually a physicist, and I theoretical physicist, and was drawn to physics because sometimes you just encounter phenomena and you have a kind of a deep enough relationship to, or at least perceived deep enough relationship to an experience that, your boundaries disappear. You sort of lose kind of perspective and bearing, and that could correspond to a kind of Stendhal moment. So there's a common theme in my work of just wanting to understand that the proximity of consciousness encountering the mystery, terror, wonder of the universe, and as an artist, and before that as a scientist, feels on point. Thank you.
Bennett, I just want to chime in here. Since you're a cinemaphile, I just want to later maybe comment on Dominic's comment about not having a Stendhal-like moment in cinema, and what your perspective might be, or maybe you've had a Stendhal-like moment in cinema.
Sorry, for me, very briefly, as I was describing it, I'm kind of a Catholic in the little c way that KJ likes to say. Sort of all comers of powerful encounters could fit into that category. So a cinema, I often have transcendent moments in the cinema, and so I understand. I think I understood Dominic's point that there is a kind of something holding you up, so making you maybe less susceptible to the collapse associated with Stendhal syndrome, and so make it less likely that you would really, pass out or something, because there's a flow and you're in a narrative or something pulling you along. But certainly, I think there's a lot of great moments. A lot of great cinema has moments that sort of take you out of time and leave you face to face with the kind of untenable beauty or overwhelming beauty of a moment or something you're seeing or hearing or experiencing. So I think it could happen. But again, I still the point about cinema being a different mode of encountering cinema differently than other modes of specifically static or physical art. I think that's an interesting point to consider.
I think it's a question. I don't know. It's just a very brief, instant reaction that if you're in a cinema, you're actually being taken. You're being guided from the beginning to the end. When you encounter an object or a painting, in fact, you need to be in a control. And for me, the Stendhal syndrome is the moment of losing a control. So if you want to lose a control, you need to be within a control to lose it. In the cinema, in fact, you are being controlled and you agree on this. So there's nothing to lose.
Well, I think there's a lot of non-narrative film, for instance, where I don't think that you're not being drawn along the thread, so on the track so clearly. So I think, like I said, I agree. I agree with that point. But cinema takes so many different forms that certainly in sitting in a cinema, I've had moments comparable to staring at great art.
Dominic, it occurs to me that what you're saying, if we accept it, it would apply equally to theatrical. Like really, what you're talking about is less the cinema as a technical apparatus, so much as a narrative spectacle, and that the guiding, to use your terminology. Am I not right?
Well, but there is a difference. I don't know. It's just a simple reflection without any deeper consideration. But that's what I thought. It's basically that. To face the moment of Stendhal syndrome is the moment when you actually collapse, and the collapsing in front of work of art is losing your control. So when you're being led on the time thread, I'm referring to time-based media, but the time-based media
right, which is why I was saying I was suggesting it would then apply equal to theatrical cinema.
But they require allowing yourself, or kind of accepting that somebody else except yourself is going to guide you through the story, plot, or whatever. If you do not have the guidance, then you somehow need to maintain the control by yourself. So by that situation, when you need to be capable to keep the control, suddenly you lose it. In all mediums, when you're being passive in terms of being controlled by the theater or whatever medium that gives you the comfortable situation of an armchair that you can just lie on and watch, just to be passive perceiver, meaning that you do not have a control over the plot, it allows you suddenly to lose the control, which is the Stendhal Syndrome. This is just my very sort of instantaneous reaction, nothing deeper.
I wonder, it's
maybe.
I mean, I guess one question I have is with the Stendhal Syndrome, the 3D experience, and how does the polarity of theatricality, absorption, perhaps offer a spectrum, start to talk about a spectrum of forms of identification.
I mean, this is what I'm fascinated.
Spectrum of forms of possible identification.
You just pronounced the questions that I'm particularly why I'm here.
Don, let's go to Andre and Baron, and then we'll come back to this because I complete the introductions first.
Okay, yep. Baron, I think you're next. I think Baron's in her car somewhere in Clemson, South Carolina.
How about Andre then?
Okay, Andre, you're on next.
How about Baron then?
Hi, Baron. Can you say something about yourself? Unmute yourself.
Yeah, you need to unmute yourself.
Okay, do you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, I'm sorry, I thought that this meeting was at 7 p.m., but apparently it was 7 p.m. in Rome or Berlin, not in South Carolina, US. So that's why I'm in the middle of in the car, going back to something. I am trying to go to a friend's place for another thing. So I just promised that I was going to stopping by, and I wanted to hear what you are saying as much as I can hear your conversations. I'm Baron. I teach at Clemson. I teach architecture. I'm a student of Dawn's and that's it.
Very good.
That's it then.
Okay, so thanks for watching. And so there's quite a few different, I approach this work in a way that is quite dense, but for the purposes of today's group, I wanted to concentrate on two aspects of this film. So first of all, to introduce it, it's the work is exhibited in a cabinet that opens up like a book, and on one side is a mirror, and on the other side is what's it called, a rear projection screen. So you can see the projected image on both sides of the screen, and the projection moves through quite a complex array of reflections. The projected image goes into the mirror, onto the rear projection screen, and then that rear projection image is then viewed back in the mirror. And so you see it doubled, and this doubling kind of continues in a kind of palindrome-like construction of the edit, and centered around the guy being shot at in his L-shaped room. And so the idea was to look at classic films that had a relationship to existentialism or to French left bank politics from the 1950s. And I won't go down that avenue. I'm going to come back and concentrate on the particular mechanism. So I looked at these particular films, archive films, and then at a certain point in the film, as you see, the film is edited to a moment where we see a photocopy of the last frame of that film pasted onto what was a life-size kind of standee, like you would have when you go to a cinema, like these things in the foyer. And so these standees from different films then occupy one single cinematic space. And the whole thing is filmed in using the film stock that was generally used during the late 1950s, early 60s, called Eastman 7222. And it was this film stock that kind of allowed for lots of French New Wave films to be filmed, because it allowed for filming in low light conditions. And but the important thing was that there was a continuity of film stock, continuity of medium that went from the film itself into the re-representation of the video, of the freeze frame. And for us, I was really interested in what happens at this moment when we move from watching a film to encountering a freeze frame, and then after we've encountered that freeze frame, we then encounter a moving object which is at a different register. It's no longer a freeze frame in the medium of Eastman 7222. It is a materialized object that we then see has moved out of register and into this shared space. And I was wondering about this idea that there's a kind of temporal demand on this uncanny It's an uncanny moment. It's not like uncanny per se, but there is a moment that we pass through where we have to like reconsider what we're watching. We have to, place the image from film stock to photocopy. And I suppose this is the thing that I was like, really, that's one thing that I'm really interested in for us, that there's some kind of if it's to do with the Stendhal Syndrome, like that there potentially is a temporal aspect to it. It's not just an aesthetic consideration solely, or that it's a temporally bound. And then the other thing I was interested in, second thing, is this architecture of the L-shaped room in the film. It's a clip from a film by Marcel Carnet from 1939 called Le Jour se lève. And the protagonist, played by, who's it? Jean Moreau. Is it Jean? No, I forgot his name. What's his name? Is it? I forget. Jean Gabin. Jean Gabin. That's right. Jean Gabin. Anyway, he sits on the edge of his bed. He sits on the edge of his bed having a cigarette whilst these kind of lethal shots are coming through, and in this terrible room he lives in, this L-shaped thing. But then the L-shape allows for him to kind of transgress or avoid death and become another cinema goer, kind of. He's like just watching the shots ring through, as if he's in a slightly one step to the side of the situation that he finds himself in. And there's something there, and I can't quite name it, but there's something there that connects to an idea of spectatorship and participation and something to do with being outside, coming back to this overarching idea of metalepsis, of being in and out of a situation, that he's both in and out of his room and on the edge of death. I suppose those are the two main things, but be curious to hear, like, if there's, of a way of naming this relationship between something that is a situation, first of all, that means that we have to then adopt a new subjectivity or a new understanding of the situation in order to proceed in understanding how to read the world.
What's striking about what you say is that this opening of a new dimension seems to offer a place that is then taken up by something that doesn't quite fit, as if you reach a point in a play or a drama or a script where you know something is going to happen, and you're prepared for it. But then all of a sudden there's a switch at the very last minute, and it's substituted with something that's overwhelming and makes the viewer really doubt on which side of the production they're actually found. And answering Dominique's question, I think it's when the spectator is ripped out of a secure space and thrown into a very insecure one. I just wonder if anyone, I have this fairly frequently, where I have a dream, and in my dream I wake up, and then I realize I'm still in my dream.
Like Dead of Night.
Yes. And then I fall asleep again, but I fall asleep in my dream of falling asleep. So I don't know. Am I going crazy? I hope somebody else has had these experiences.
I think I've fallen asleep in a dream before.
Yeah.
Andrew, you're muted.
I haven't had one of those. I'd wake up in my dream, and for a while I would think I was awake.
The movie Inception is largely based on that premise.
Could I just make a comment about the short film that we saw, which I really enjoyed, by the way. I found that, I mean, it's sort of going back to a comment of Andy's about apparatus. He said one of his interests was in display. And I was thinking that you succeed in kind of like so problematizing the apparatus of display of film that I was really perplexed by continuity. Okay. Like I realized, for instance, that we depend an awful lot upon the screen for the continuity in a film. I mean, maybe even more so than the plot and other things too. I mean, you know, preconceptions about sort of how cameras move and the temporality of film, you know, I mean, it's not just the screen. And you succeed in so disrupting it in this short film that, like, I actually had trouble recognizing the same character twice. I mean, you know, you kind of like provoked a sort of a filmic dyslexia in me that I've never had before. I couldn't actually even recognize the same character twice or had trouble doing, you know, the several times that you return to the scene of the guy in his bedroom smoking the cigarette and one of the bullets. Like, I wasn't sure if the bullets breaking the glass, you know, the little holes in the glass and stuff. I wasn't sure if the bullets were part of the same scene as the room that guy was in. I mean, everything was just completely kind of dissociated. And I thought it was quite extraordinary that. And so I don't have a lot to say about Stendhal Syndrome with respect to it, but just that you did something very extraordinary with continuity. And I guess if there is a Stendhal thing in here, if the Stendhal Syndrome depends upon having a fourth wall that the work erupts through, I'm not sure that I don't think you ever had a fourth in this film. I don't think there was anything to erupt through. So this film might be the kind of limit of one of the limits of the spectrum of, as opposed to actually example. So I just put that out, you know, as a first response. Quite happy to change my light of it.
Well, I mean, I was actually thinking the film was a little bit like a remedy to this Stendhal Syndrome in the way that it was doing a more sort of like, or a kind of like arresting of something that is in motion, while the Stendhal Syndrome is about something that is still, just unbearably still, and you have to just it shocks you or itself or the whole surrounding scene into motion. Well, yeah, that is kind of Stendhal Syndrome seems like it's sort of hyper identified with it. Well, this Mark's film features this this kind of like deep familiarization where we're looking at relatively recognizable realistic images, and we're no longer on the same page with them because we're able to see the actual materiality of the individual frames, sort of like pages. But I was interested in what you were saying, Mark, a second ago about that the uncanny aspect to it is momentary. It's what's uncanny, it comes into us in a glimmer and a glimpse and a flash, or maybe. But I thought it was almost like when the John Caban character, you could call him that, like, sneaking around his room, he was almost kind of like inhabiting uncanny like modality inside of the frame. It's the way he was sort of slinking around that room. Yeah, the incomplete rectangle, the L or whatever. Anyway, yeah. I mean, I was just wondering, what you thought about like whether the relation to the moment, like sort of lesson kind of thing, perhaps, and Stendhal.
Well, I don't think. I agree. Who was it that said first of all? Was it Bennett? Can't remember. No, somebody. No, Lawrence. He was saying that it's not Stendhal. I think that's true, and it's like, but perhaps there's and it's to do with, and this fourth wall thing is that all is accepted within this world of this particular film, that it's acceptable to move into this other mode that otherwise would be considered fourth wall. That it's something else. It's outside of the diegesis of the film, but it's then reincorporated into a wider diegesis. So it's kind of like it's okay to, I suppose, Alice in Wonderland, it's okay for Alice to be some different size. It's all acceptable.
Right.
Yeah.
I want to, Mark, a couple of comments. The second Lawrence made. Before that, I want to loop back to the last Stendhal, the Affinity Syndrome sublime description, as it did strike me, described it, or as it employed Gabon character, protected, say, apotropaic dispositive. It's a kind of literal architecturalized this describes sublime, approximate, so you're at the edge of a precipice, but you're safe. So that L room, it struck me that it was a kind of literalization of context describing, and that perhaps Stendhal syndrome ensues when something goes awry and carefully proximate, that prophylactic proximity. And then my second comment goes to this idea, just talking about the wall, and that if part of what is at stake in the construction of that wall is the sequestering of the space, rules are different than in the rest of it. Now, part of that sequester, what it requires is a hermetic, immunological, nothing can come into that world that the author of that world doesn't want in. That's sort of how that space of art works. Ludic space. Seems to me that many of the devices employed, well, first of all, let me say that the hermeticism of space is often related to the homogeneity, and your own work is resolute, and then perhaps picking up on something that I've heard, Lauren, anyway, is that media frustrates construction, and in frustrating construction wall frustrates the conditions of immersion from which Stendhal Syndrome.
What just Andrew said, which I find very interesting from my sort of pictorial, is the term that you use, transmediality, but at the same time, I would say the whole work is equal in terms of its nostalgia. So my question would be whether to perceive the apparatus, we need to know the rules on the basis of its historical roots, because you're not using any sorts of whether it's a film or whether it's a reproduction, when you can see the raster, it's always very strongly charged by this kind of nostalgic field that we know it's not contemporary mean of transmission of the image. It already has its history. So my question is whether, if we go closer to this idea of apparatus that we've been drawn or kind of misguided by, whether we should really know or be familiar with at the first point. Because when I look at the film, I already knew that it's something which is already equal in terms of its historical aspect. You do not mix the time, in terms of the origins of the material, because you refer equally to the film medium as much as the photography, which is more of a historical than contemporary.
Yes, and the text, the narration underneath is from what's his name? Céline, yes, Louis Ferdinand Céline, Journey to the End of the Night, from a scene when an old lady is making money from a very bad situation, and she has unearthed some cadavers that have been mummified, and she takes tourists around to receive some money to point out that they've still got their teeth. so yes, it's very it is historic, and it's of that history, referring to its own historic position as something which is being like raised in cultural value through the credit, through the subtitle.
Angie?
Yeah, I'm not sure what you said in your previous discussion of the Stendhal Syndrome, and I don't get the idea of the fourth wall, but just a few thoughts that occurred to me as I was watching this fantastic film, Mark. It was a real treat. If memory serves me right, one of the first people that problematizes the position of the viewer is not an art historian or Lacan, it's Foucault in his Watching of Las Meninas. Watching is the right word there, because the viewer does not see himself in the picture, is abducted or takes the position of excess and excrement. Cut. Remember Lacan's visual schema with the four mirrors. There is no fourth wall, but there's two mirrors and two objects, a foursome there. What Lacan says is when the mirrors move out of alliance, the eye cannot see anything. And I was watching your film, Mark, and I was pretty much having the impression that what was moving around was everything, and no one could see anything, let alone themselves. And the disruption, the temporal disruption with the cutouts, or the interpolation of the cutouts in the living scene, it was absolutely fantastic. It seems to me that there's a circulating excess, and what the viewer is confronted with is their own absence. And what is created there, constant death, trauma, imminent death with the shooting, is also something which is totally unassimilable and always unassimilable. And therefore, what relates that, in my view, to the Stendhal Syndrome is that suddenly it's not beauty and a moment of desublimation, if you like, that overpowers the subject. It's the knowledge that they're left alone. They're left out of it, out of this beauty. It's a bit like the aesthetic opposite, I suppose, of what Don was talking about in another panel. Looking at the ambassadors, Holbein's ambassadors, looking at the skull, the beauty can also overwhelm in the same sense. It feels to me, and it's kind of obvious in your film. And the cutouts is. Let us not forget that the trauma that persists is like a cutout in a living image. It keeps recurring, and it's never resolved. So it was a pleasure watching that. I didn't faint, but I liked it. And my question to all of you is this: if we can cry, if we can be moved to tears, or why not faint? Last comment. I'm teaching popular culture, and one of the films I usually take apart, but nevertheless show to my students, is Woman in Red. No, the one with what's it called? She's a prostitute and befriends a guy who has lots of money. Not Woman in Red.
Pretty Woman.
Pretty Woman, exactly. When he takes her to the opera, the parents of Penzance. Oh no, I don't know. It's another opera. It's Turandot, I think. She cries. She's so moved, and in the end, the lady in the next seat says to her, "Did you like it, dear?" Like it, she says, "I peed my pants." And the guy says, "It was better than the parents of Penzance." But if we can pee ourselves or cry, why not faint?
Thank you. That's wonderful.
As you've spoken about different aspects of this, it's actually quite fascinating to see how a work of art can be interpreted in so different ways. So there is this paper by a guy called Chuck Goodwin. I don't know if you've come across. Chuck is a cognitive scientist, a linguist, who's talking about professional vision. So different people, depending on their perspective, see different things than their expectations and what they want to see. So I saw something very different, perhaps, in your film, Mark. Because I'm dealing with the past a lot, so I saw something about the interpretation of the past. So I saw a critique in the way we perceive and communicate the past. So there are events which are very rich in information, which are interpreted in many different ways. And of course, the event is not before us. We see a take of that event in the film from a particular angle, and we still see a lot of the information present we have a mirror image of the information. So we kind of see different perspectives of the same film, yet very similar stuff. And then we see a cutout, which is very similar to the way we, on the one hand, transmit it in a very deprived information. But actually, our memory tends to be like a cutout, deprived of a lot of. And the cutout is ultimately what stays. And so I'm sorry that I saw something probably unintended, but I actually saw this as a very interesting critique of how the past is experienced. So I just wanted, as I was listening to you all as you were talking, and I was just thinking, don't you think that the Stendhal Syndrome, I mean, I heard about the temporal aspect, but I'm wondering whether this awe, this overwhelming is being created by something, needs some previous work. Meaning, would you feel awe before a piece of art that you don't know? Would you feel awe towards a piece of art that does not refer to things you? I don't know. I think not. But this is my take. I would feel awe if I was psyched up towards something and then seeing it. My imaginary projections, my whatever you want, however you want to call them, would enrich the experience so much that would make it overwhelming. But without this psyching up, well, obviously, if you don't know anything about a piece of art, it's the first time you see it and it doesn't refer to things, then it becomes quite poor in meaning. So therefore, it cannot be overwhelming. It's at least informational. I don't know what are your takes on it?
I think this might be go ahead.
I think that's quite interesting. You're saying that because probably Stendhal had a good idea of the works he was about to visit, and maybe that helps.
It's Florence. It wasn't Como, or it wasn't Cremona, or something, right? I mean, I'm not to say that there. But for me, it was the Parthenon. It wasn't. It wasn't the temple in, I don't know. It wasn't a not so well known, or it wasn't something that I didn't know. And the same thing would happen to, I don't know, to an actor. I can imagine, or an actress. I can imagine someone losing it for an icon.
I have a great anecdote I'll just quickly share, which is that I visited Pompeii also at dawn, kind of early in the day, when there was hardly anyone there. And as people started to amass, we arrived at a fountain, at a place where you could wash. And there was a woman washing her brow there, and then she brought her head up, and she had two lumps of bone put in there. And she was the performance artist Orlan. And she had these kind of body modifications, which gave her the appearance of a satyr. And a little girl saw her and started screaming. And then her father came forward and started shouting at Orlan, saying, "What business have you got doing this here to my little girl?" And was that like a Stendhal syndrome? Although she didn't know Orlan, but I did. So I had another kind of version.
I just want to again bring back on, and that is historical and biographical and geographic conditions are part of that apparatus. Lay the groundwork, set the thing of Paolo Verna, the Italian philosopher. He talks, quote, in which he makes this. In other words, I call sensation toothache. The second, the sense, excessive liquidity, flower, a sad face. Second degree sensual is non-links that are, however, radical. And there's a resonance between that observation, both to attempt to have to kind of valorize and not to imagine the cultural context. It's not something, the cultural context, the historical context, situates you is a part of that, or an essential part of your experience.
Yep. But I mean, it's the Elvis Presley moment. If you saw Elvis Presley, I mean, and you were a fan, it would be likely to lose it, especially now.
He's supposed to be dead.
Exactly, especially now. But if you didn't know who he was, right? you'd see Elvis Presley now, and you'd say, "What a weird dude," you know.
We talked a little bit about Beatlemania and the kind of reactions people had in the presence of the Beatles. I think getting back to one point you made, Evangelist, is where I posed the question to Cynthia as an art collector. You know, part of me as a doc thinks of art as a personal Rorschach test. So you're confronted, you bring all of your baggage to this work of art and have a relationship with it. So Cynthia, I was interested in your perspective as a collector. You know, do you have this frisson or terror when looking at a piece of art you're considering buying?
No, I think it is not a matter of terror, is a matter of attraction, and is something that we, in a certain way, you cannot control. Sometimes it happens. It can happen in front of an artwork that you want to proceed, you want to have. You can lose the control in this way, that you don't understand anything and you don't see anything else. You want to purchase that work because you want to have it, and is a relationship between yourself, your body, your mind, your brain, and the object. That's why I think that it is a bit difficult that it can happen with a movie or in a film, because we can get involved in a film, we can cry, we can suffer, but is something emotional and is something totalizing, but is not the Stendhal syndrome. Stendhal syndrome, in my opinion, is a little bit different, is something that really is an object that touch you so deeply that you lose the control. In some aspect of the collecting, you can fall down in this situation, that you lose the control and you want to purchase it and you want to have a physical relationship that keep it forever with you. This is in my opinion. I don't know if you agree with me.
Would then the actual act of buying be a remedy for Stendhal?
Excuse me, can you say again?
My question is, would the actual buying or purchasing or possessing an object be a remedy for a Stendhal syndrome? Because otherwise you're possessed by the object. As long as you possess it by buying it, you actually create a remedy for what's happening with. So you're struggling directly with the object, and then you possess it by buying it. Otherwise, the object would possess you if you wouldn't be able to buy it.
But this is a double situation. How much the object can possess you?
Yeah.
This is the question. How much the object can possess you? And this is not really maybe a Stendhal syndrome. I think that Stendhal syndrome has a temporality, and so is limited in time. Whereas this relationship between the object and the human being, or the human being and the object, can last for a longer time. So it is a little bit of losing control just in one moment. The moment in which you are pushed to purchase could be a little bit Stendhal, but I don't think so. But in a longer time is an intricate relationship between the object and yourself.
If I could just give an example from an experience of trying to memorize a poem. It was actually one I was using in a class, Annabel Lee by Edgar Allan Poe, which many people think is not a great poem at all. But I couldn't remember a couple of lines, because built into the poem is a kind of trick that makes you forget it. It repeats things, but in an odd way. And I was on a trip. I had to stop the car and go into a public library to get a copy of the poem. And once I fixed the order of the lines that I had been struggling with, and I was driving on the road, I had this amazing feeling of reversal. Instead of me memorizing the poem, I realized that the poem was memorizing me. And at that point, I lost possession. I was no longer possessing the poem by knowing how to recite it in public. The poem had entirely reversed the terms of the deal. And I found that in lesser degrees and other kinds of things that I've tried to master, that the whole experience of mastery, I think Lacan and other linguists say, we don't speak language, language speaks us.
There's this beautiful quote in The Man Without Qualities, and I guess in the first volume, where the protagonist Ulrich has accomplished kind of everything. But everything he sets his mind to, he becomes very good at. And he says at a certain moment, he realized that the more he became a master of something, the less the subject became, he became more a part of the subject and less a part of him. So he could never actually be a master of anything. The mastery belonged in the discipline. And so in the end, he realizes for all his mastery, he has no idea who he is.
One thing that's really characteristic of the encounters with the Parthenon by Corb, Freud, Le Corbusier, Freud, and Isadora Duncan is that they find the agency is reversed. They're not there looking at it, it's looking at them. And in particular, interrogating, okay? And it's probably raised to the most feverish pitch in Le Corbusier's account, okay? He feels, he actually says, this is some implacable master who's kind of like, whose interrogation is grinding me down, but even but Freud and Isadora Duncan also talk about the Parthenon interrogating them, the other, and I think that just has something to do with this question of mastery, and also it's true for Isadora Duncan and Corb that it was that experience that led them to do what they then went to do. Corb decided at that moment an architect, and Duncan decided to a dancer. I'm not sure. I think Freud was already a shrink. But they were both quite young at times, so they were kind of like life altering. That was that.
To some extent, for maybe the concept of the Stendhal Syndrome for people who, in principle, are working in the arts or trying to create their own works, may have a particular kind of resonance in just thinking about this T.S. Eliot riff on the role of every person who's writing's relationship to the history of the language. And it's kind of a nice way to sort of ask any writer to try to take their work seriously, because by contributing to the global history of the language, you literally are changing the meaning of everything that's preceded you and will follow you. You're sort of creating the texture, part of the texture of language, and it becomes kind of a responsibility. And I think that's what you're bringing up there, Lawrence. You're being interrogated by the master. You're confronted by, my gosh, this is, if you're encountering this creative work and you are going to participate in the collective creation of human culture, or even universal, maybe beyond human culture, then there's may well be some responsibility entailed, or a burden.
Sarah?
I just have a few kind of random thoughts, but a few things have been triggered. Don, what you were talking about, I thought was a great example of the ambassadors and the gaze, and then being enveloped by the work of art. And I suppose I was thinking about how desire, in a Lacanian sense, is something that we're not master of. We're subject to it when we desire. We're in the kind of, we can be in the masochist position. And so I was wondering the relationship between desire and the Stendhals. I suppose Angie mentioned, is there a sort of a comparison or similarity between crying and fainting? But I would automatically think fainting seems to me to be something else than crying, because if crying is part of the Stendhal syndrome, then, I've definitely, as I said, probably I'm in disavowal of it. But there's something that seems to be nearly more profound about if a work of art can be to actually completely blot out, where you don't know. I would imagine in a faint, you don't quite know. Fainting is akin to dying in a sense, in terms of losing consciousness. So is there something that has been that the subject person has been confronted with that reflects a desire? You know, I mean, is it as trite as thinking that there's something about repression going on, that the work of art, you know, for a moment there's a glimmer or a flash through repression? And then something else I was thinking was Antonin Artaud, who, you know, the idea of theater as a spectacle maybe being a form of it. I mean, he kind of attempted with what he was trying to do with the spectacle of theater to overwhelm. He was attempting to overwhelm the spectator and to break that dialectic between the audience and the spectacle. And in that very attempt, I sometimes think it's almost like the film that makes apparent its artist. You know, I don't know. There's something utopian about that, you know. So he wanted to use, you know, the senses really on stage, noise, sound, to overwhelm literally, without maybe having that phrase, but attempting to create some sort of transcendence. So that might not be the Stendhal Syndrome, but I'm just wondering, where does desire come in maybe to, because our own desire can be overwhelmed when it's triggered.
Once arc lights became possible in theater, phantasmagoria became a running ambition. So they would use scrims and things going on beneath the stage to project the image out into the audience. The Bibi Gallienus, of course, had tried to do this by perspectival means, by forcing a perspective that would make the audience feel overwhelmed by the action on the stage. So yes, it has been the conscious desire of the artist to make the spectator pass out.
Right.
My cardiologist was telling me that the vagus nerve is involved with this. It's the nerve that when we pass out, it's the one that says basically shut things down. You can't get out of here. So you can pass out by a lot of things. Sight of blood, that's very common. A frightening experience, or there's the spousal cardiac arrest. When spouses see the other spouse either dying or distressed, they can die on the spot. So the vagus nerve apparently it's in control of a lot of things that are theatrical as well as mortal.
Right.
I asked the doctors, the present doctors, can be the real organ involved in the Stendhal Syndrome, the vagus nerve, and can be the pivotal organ involved, because I think that fainting like in front of an artwork or something, it's really connected to the vagus nerve. It's not only blood pressure, is nothing involved in because vagus nerve cannot be controlled. I think it is absolutely impossible to control it. So maybe I am asking the doctors if it is the pivotal organ involved in the reaction of Stendhal syndrome.
I know that Don and I had dedicated the next our next series actually to the vagus nerve. So not sure how much we want to reveal that now. It'll be the subject of our next one. But ultimately, when we talk about syncope, I mean, all of these are controlled by the brain. I mean, the nerves are an outgrowth of the brain, correct? So you can't really say that it's going to be localized to one area. It's all going to be centrally controlled.
Yeah, Susan Buckmorse makes a good case for the fact that the brain extends through to the tips of the fingers and beyond, because in effect our haptic involvement with objects in space, our movement. I think Pina Bausch made a fantastic movie where she demonstrated how the body extends into space and effectively makes space into a nervous system. So I don't know if you've seen that movie. It's fantastic. It also comes in 3D, which is just about gives you a Stendhal syndrome to watch her move. No, I don't. No, I think she produced that. Does anybody know about that? Ted, do you know about Pina Bausch?
Well, Van Vanger directed Via. which is a document. Just wondering if that's what.
Whatever comes in 3D.
I don't know.
Yeah, there's also a discussion down the dance route about flamenco. Flamenco is really a kind of 14th century system of internalizing evil, because if you watch the way the flamenco dancer reaches out and pulls in forces into their body and aligns them with the spine and then stomps on the table or the floor or whatever, you can see that it's the antithesis of French ballet. Instead of going out and extending into space, it actually pulls in centripetally everything that needs to be cleansed and reprocessed. And certainly, if you watch a flamenco dance, you almost go crazy. It can drive you nuts if it's a really good one.
They're the sin eaters.
The
sin eaters.
Sin
right?
eaters.
They purge the room of the evil.
Exactly. Somebody's got to do it. Wow. Do we want to have some tie-up comments on the Parthenon?
We could do. I need to leave soon. I need to leave in about 5 minutes. But I mean, what I was just going to read. I don't have a thesis. I was just going to read a passage from Corb and a passage from Duncan. That was you know, the preparation that I did was to put post-it notes in this book.
You're so low tech.
Would have liked to have been able to do a film or something like Mark did, but I'm afraid it's just pink post-it notes. I mean, if Don, if that's
yeah, that would be great.
Okay,
I mean, it's better to have too short a session than too long one. So
Yeah.
we can use yours as a kind of benediction, as they used to do in the Methodist Church where I grew up. You would
Right.
have someone give a little benediction, and you'd go out, you know, weeping or whatever.
Well, I don't think we're going to weep or faint here. Anyway, this is Isadora Duncan. And I mean, this is a sort of a 3-page or 2 1.5-page passages. I'm just going to read a short paragraph from one of them. She's come to Athens, and she says, and goes up to the Parthenon. She writes, "The first days as I stood there, my body was as nothing, and my soul was scattered. But gradually called by the great inner voice of the temple, came back. But gradually called by the great inner voice of the temple, gradually came back the parts of myself to worship. First came my soul and looked upon the door, and then came my body and looked. But in both were silence and stillness. I did not dare to move, for I realized that of all the movements my body had made, none was worthy to be made before a Doric. And as I stood thus, I realized that I must find a dance whose effort was to be worthy of this, or never dance again." And you know, obviously there's a lot more here. She talks about beauty with a capital B. She talks about the sort of sense of something radiating outwards, vast circles of, and then in a separate, this is actually from a separate book, she writes, but also about the Parthenon. "We arrived at violet-crowned Athens that evening, and the daybreak found us with trembling limbs and hearts faint with adoration, ascending the steps of her temple." It's a little bit over the top. "As we mounted, it seemed to me that all the life I had known up till that time had fallen away from me as a motley garment, that I had never lived before, that I was born for the first time in that long breath and first gaze." So, you know, she's nobody fainted.
All on the road to Damascus.
Yeah.
But God is the temple.
I mean, it's well, I guess it is easy to sort of take the piss, but it's
Oh, not at all.
No, but I mean, you know, not take the piss, but I mean, it there is humor in it, but she didn't experience it as humor. So, but that's her. And then if we were to look at Corb, this is just, I mean, he talks about, Actually, the other thing which is interesting, they both mention seeing the Parthenon in relation to Mount, oh God, I'm forgetting the name, Mount Pentelicus. They both mention Pentelicus. And both of them, and this is interesting, they, it's in the background, it's sort of on the skyline, Parthenon foreground, Pentelicus background. But neither of them talk about it in a way that conveys a sense of space disciplined by the geometry of perspective. They both talk about it. They both sort of put it into in a kind of economy, a non-spatial economy. It's about, there's where the stones of the Parthenon came. It's not background. It's part of some kind of exchange, flow of materials. Anyway, this is Korb, and he says, this is, I think, fairly compressed. He says, the first distant sighting, he's seeing it from afar on the ships, the first distant sighting. Here, the rectitude of the temple, their impeccable structures, and the brutality of the site were confirmed. The strong spirit triumphed. The entablature of a cruel rigidity crushes and terrorizes. The feeling of a superhuman fatality seizes you. The Parthenon, a terrible machine, grinds and then, and the other thing is, he has an argument. He's traveling with somebody, one of his childhood friends, and before he can go up to see the Parthenon, he has to get in an argument with his friend and say, leave. I have to see this. I don't want you, cluttering up my experience of the place. Anyway, so he says, then this is a few passages later, to see the Acropolis is a dream one treasures without even dreaming to realize. I accepted that this place should be like a repository of a sacred standard, the basis for all measurement. And this is, yet why must I, like so many others, name the Parthenon the undeniable master as it looms up from its stone base and yield even with anger? Oh, and here's the Pentelicus bit. He says, and no other external sign of life was evident except far off in the distance, Pentelicus, creator of these, bearing in its side a marble wound. In other words, it's not the sort of perspectival distance, the sort of depth of field, which is important. He cites it as an external sign of life. I'm not even sure what that means, external. But Pentelicus, the mountain with the quarry scars, is an external sign of life. So, it's like even inside and outside, which is like a really fundamental architectural category. Anyway, it goes on, and the reason why I said that I'm not sure we're talking about the sort of disappearance of a fourth wall, but more like a sort of a disturbance or a disturbance in the capacity of space to hold us safely distant from our objects. It's like if you remember the Lacan diagram of the visual field, this triangulating of subject versus gaze. Well, that triangulating is actually keeping that thing away from you. It's distancing you from your object. There's a sense in this passage that there's simply no buffer. There's simply no space is failing to keep this thing away from, to keep him safe. And it's kind of the 20 years later when he publishes The New World of Space, just a lovely cheap paper. But it's a collection of essays, and the first essay is called Ineffable Space. And in it, he's describing some kind of non-perspectival space, a space that projected geometry. And I'll just read one sentence here. The very first sentence in the book, he says, taking possession of space is the first gesture of living things, of men and of animals, of plants, and of a fundamental manifestation of equilibrium duration. And then the occupation of space is the first existence. And then he goes on to describe, in connection with the Parthenon, a kind of a space which always reminds me of Kandinsky paintings. It's just streaks of light and color and lines and explosions. And it's this ineffable space. It's a non-perspectival that's, if anything, it's kinetic, energetic, but doesn't have depth of field. So, and he talks about it in connection with the Parthenon. He says, it's not, this isn't actually a grammatically correct sentence. It says action of the work on its surrounding, vibrations, cries or shout, such as originate from the Parthenon, arrows darting away like rays, as if springing from an explosion. The near or distant sight is shaken by, touched, wounded, dominated, caressed. Okay, so this is totally a kind of kinetic and non-perspectival space. And then he says, and then a boundless depth opens, effaces walls, drives away contingent present, accomplishes the miracle. So that's, I think that the challenge or the disturbance for Korb, at least, is a kind of spatial. And as I said, I interpret it in terms of Lacan's diagram for the visual field as a kind of space, as a kind of apparatus for keeping us safe from, if we get too close, they'll consume us. The quotes, the Korb quotes are from Journey to the East, which is his diary, travel diary from when he was a young man doing a kind of architectural tour of Europe. Stops at the Athens, obviously. In fact, I think he was going to go on to Egypt, and he saw the Parthenon. He said, "Nah, fuck it, that's enough for me." It's like he says, I'll have to see the pyramids another time. It's kind of fun, I think. So that's I wasn't part of the first Stendhal Syndrome symposium, so I don't know I don't know if maybe you were already looking at spatial.
This is all new territory.
I was really fascinated with how what you're saying, how you're coming to this idea of being consumed comes back to Roger Caillois in his mimicry and literary psychoanalysis.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So it all comes back.
Yeah. I mean, that's also a space that kind of like fails to articulate you from your object. Okay.
Well, one thing that did strike me is, and correct me if I'm wrong, but Korb sense in Korb's case that perhaps counterintuitively it occurs in rather right. It's not about simulation. The thematics, the basis of all measure, doesn't get much.
Oh, absolutely.
I think that's because we tend the ecstatic, selfish. We tend to Korb or Duncan, the language in rectitude. Is over.
Absolutely.
And that's kind of interesting.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't. I'm just trying to think of when Korb is he ever in Dionysian mode?
I don't think so, especially the pure. Right.
He has some sketches. There's some sketches of him in a whorehouse, and they're pretty explicit, actually. Maybe that's Dionysian mode, but this is all. I mean, this is early Korb. This is he then goes and like develops Maison Domino.
Purism and regulatory traces, religion, geometry, Korb.
It's all about laws of space. Yeah.
What I find truly fascinating, which I just heard from Lawrence, is I have no clue what you were talking about for the last 5 minutes. Really, I'm not in the subject. But what I found really fascinating is you're mentioning the kinetic aspect of perception, because you use this term kinetic, that our perception is kinetic, and for me. It actually rings the bell in terms of this fainting, which is related to gravity as an integral part of the Stendhal Syndrome. Then there is a gravity that suddenly, by fainting, we lose. So we lose the base. And I don't know if you ever witnessed free falling from the parachute. It's an incredible experience, because it takes before you open the parachute, you free fall for like 60 seconds. So that's a pretty long time to establish yourself in this completely different field of perception, that you're free falling, and at the same time, it's not a second or two, it's kind of a continuous process. And I mean,
we've lost you, or I've lost.
Yeah, the sound is delayed, the signal.
Cathedral, the main vault, for the 60 seconds when free falling and before opening the parachutes. So I mean, I wasn't really one of them, because I just had a very modest experience of free falling. but it really made me feel that our perception changes completely when we suddenly lose the sense of the base. So maybe that's why also it's like in a cinema, when you sit, it's a different and far less likely to get that, whether when you stand in front of the work of art, so you actually rely on your legs and also on the floor, which is the base. And suddenly when you lose it, I mean, I had to say that the closest experience I had to that kind of sensation was in front of James Turrell work, because suddenly I was doing. I didn't faint. I didn't fall into sort of any depth, but I started to desperately look for the ground.
We don't have the phrase in English. I had the rug pulled out from.
Yeah.
Well, that's exactly that's it. And I have to say that probably this may be related to a story which was somehow I felt very sort of gifted and privileged that I could have this experience as a child, and it gave me a lot. It's a funny story. But somehow the way how I was taken out of the church without the gravity actually granted maybe or something similar to what could have happened if I really fainted. Well, the story is that when I was a 7-year-old boy, my grandmother, she was a deep, really very strict Catholic, and she would faint on the holy masses, like regularly. And I was really impressed because every time the crowd really appreciating what was happening was carrying her out of the church. So one day I just felt like I want to have the same experience, and I faked I faked fainting. I just collapsed, and they were all fascinated that this boy was praying so hard that he actually fainted. And they carried me out of the church, but oh God, the experience is absolutely divine. I mean, although I knew I was fainting, I faked the whole thing. The actual process of losing a gravity and taking me out of the church with this kind of adoration was one of the most fantastic experiences I had in my childhood.
Maybe your aunt was faking it too. I mean, maybe she was fake. Your aunt was.
Maybe, who knows? Maybe, but it was really.
It's a little like crowd
question that the gravity, maybe the gravity that we lose the sense of gravity, it changes our perception. Or the perception of the work of art actually allows us to lose the sense of gravity, lose the sense of control of our legs, that we actually stand. We kind of postures, and then when we lose this posture, this gives us this brings us to this idea of that why the Stendhal Syndrome is so present when you actually stand and you can sense the gravity. Suddenly you lose it, and then you're off. So that's I don't know. It's just I think this reflection upon your wonderful, for me, wonderful way of describing the perception as kinetic.
Right.
Well, and could I just add to that quickly, Dominic, too, that then what we're also describing is our own bipedalism, part of this apparatus display that we were discussing earlier. Like, we're part of the display technique.
Andrew, I love the word bipedalism.
By dint of our physiognomy.
I think,
it produces, it's almost like von Eusk, that by virtue of our perceptual apparatus, we can notice things in our environment, not others.
In English, two words are almost identical: faint and faint. One means to fake something, the other means to fall down. So you were just enacting an English homophonic accident.
Make it till you make
one
it.
Thing that I just want to make one comment before we get too far away from it, just about fainting and the free falling. It was about the comment about free falling, and it occurred to me while you were talking about the free falling that it would be possible to understand architecture as a defense against, in other words, the floor that we walk on, and because we walk on it, we probably don't notice it. You could understand that as a defense against free fall. And while probably in most cases you wouldn't notice it, or you wouldn't want to make that thesis, you wouldn't want to say this is kind of like prominent in the architecture. There are certain architects, like say Mies van der Rohe, where the floor and the sort of platform that a building stands on is kind of celebrated. Yeah. And also that's certainly the case with the Parthenon. I mean, the Parthenon is basically three things, you know, the roof, the column field, and a platform.
Yeah.
And you know, it isn't me kind of noticing that. That's sort of how the Parthenon received in our discourse.
Well,
basically.
it also.
And hang on, well, maybe I've said it. I've said it. That's yeah. I'm sorry. Go on, Andy.
So is also a kind of prophylactic protection against the scary chthonic energy that all sit now under, right? It's a kind of membrane, except we're not on mute, we're on a constructed plinth of some kind and protected with all this associated with your chthonic, much the same way the carpet protects what might be coming at a predator horizon.
So you have the Piera della Francesca, the flagellation of the Christ, which is one of the fantastic examples. The idea of the floor in West Indian painting, the whole story and the whole indifference is created by the platform, by the ground, not by the figures, but by the way how the floor was.
I'm thinking of the central post with bound to in a gridded floor. Is that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the floor is a major performer in this painting. It's the most, I think, profound expression of the indifference of the culty by the floor, by the ground.
With the Parthenon, the floor, of course, is elevated because the temple is not a congregation made to admire outside. It's an object sculpture. You know, no one goes into the nails.
No, the spectator comes from under the ground.
To the, you know, you're not there at 3:00 for Sunday afternoon prayer meeting. It's so the floor has. That's why it's elevated and not on a. It's not inviting.
It's a trick that Frank Lloyd Wright used in the Unity Temple. Have people come inside from below. Works every time.
The
guy who wrote it's an argument about the Barcelona Bleak entry, a kind of an attempt to achieve by
right.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I think our time has come to
Lawrence, would you be any?
Yes.
They're very tantalizing.
I make them available. I mean, I can give you the titles and stuff, but I can flip them around by email. I don't think you'll find them as PDFs.
Yeah.
If you have an iPhone, you can take a photograph.
I could photograph some of the pages. I could do that if you want. Yes.
Yeah, just send it to me and I'll circulate it.
Okay.
They're really compelling.
Yeah, but I think Andy's right. They're very Apollonian. These are people still in charge of their senses, and they haven't been struck dead by any gods just yet.
Yeah.
Mark, I also, before you spin,
and conversely, thank you all so much for such amazing responses. It was so valuable. Thank you.
I noticed that you have a couple more films on Vimeo. Are we going to be able to use that same password to watch them?
You can go in through my. I'll just quickly show you the. Here we go. You can go in through my website and use the passwords on all of them. So then it shows the context and the
right and
the Vimeo.
Cool. Okay. And you're a film PhD at Kingston, or
it's within the Contemporary Art Research Centre,
right.
And that's part of the School of Art at Kingston. Right. But we also get access to the Centre for Research in European Philosophy, which is great, with Peter Osborne, Peter Hallwood, Eric Allier, and it's great.
Cool. Okay. Well, thanks very much. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, I think it was a great feature, a feature film.
A feature film or a feature film?
Feature. It is a feature.
Creature film. Maybe for Halloween you can save it. I'm really heartened to think that I would love to invite everyone to write something and submit it so that we can pull together a kind of publish event. It sounds like it's going to be a mammoth journal edition, more than a theme issue. It sounds almost like a kind of portmanteau book. But feel free. I'll try to make this explicit in an invitation so that you can provide links as well as maybe animated materials inside your submissions, because the publication will be on the web. That means you can insert videos as well as the standard literary stuff. But I like the mix of perspectives here: medicine, psychoanalysis, art, film, just experiences we've had. It's been a fantastic salad of of enjoyable things to consume. And I don't think I've had the pleasure of such an educated company in quite a while. So it's really been nice to have all of you, and the people who had to leave already were just incredible in their contributions. I'll see what I can do with the recording. It'll be a bit large, so I'm not sure I can post it on YouTube, but I might be able to condense it in some way, or at least record the audio.
How long do we go this time, Don?
Beg pardon?
I say, how long do we go this time?
2.5 hours.
Oh,
no.
Not bad.
3 hours. 3 hours.
3 hours. Okay, that sounds more like
We are setting new records. Believe me, you're all going to be on a list, whether you got here by accident or design. You're going to be continue to be pestered by me anytime we have an event. I think it's proof that people who are good critics can talk about almost anything. And so whatever our events in the future, whether they're Stendhal or not, and I think we'll be able to tie up the Stendhal with a publication. But future events, Andy's sponsoring an event on a lithosphere, which is not uniquely a Lacanian idea. It's more devious than that. But we have coming events over this year, and you're all welcome to come back and say howdy. So I'm just going to officially end it here. I don't really hate. I hate to push the button that says "in the meeting for all," so I just kind of wave to everyone and see that I tie things up without losing all of my files. So thank you so much,
everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Take good
Thanks,
care.
everyone.
Great to meet everybody.
Nice.
Bye. Thanks.
Bye. Bye.
Okay. Bye bye.